Well, why don't I get ourselves started? And
Okay.
then by the time I'm done speaking, hopefully Erica will be here and we'll have a lot of folks here. Um, I'm Dan Dranko, Tennessee Alliance for Progress. We're the primary sponsor of the new Green Economy Compass Conference, along with the Nashville Peace and Justice Center and the Wendland Cook Program for religion, labor, and ecology. And we've got about 20 other organizations throughout Tennessee and some neighboring states that are co-sponsoring this conference. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names on the screen here as people join in. Um, you're probably all familiar with Zoom. We will be recording, so if you don't want to see, you don't want your face recorded, you will want to stop your video. If you're not familiar with Zoom, at the top, there's a view button, the right top corner, and you can click on that and go to speaker view. It's the best way to watch the program. We've got a great session as one of our 8 workshops here. I'm actually in the midst of teaching a class on restorative justice on Zoom. That's my regularly scheduled class at the Vanderbilt Divinity School. So I will need to be leaving you all and turning it over to the capable hands of Kent Manault, who will be leading us through this workshop.
Okay, well, great. Thanks so much, Daniel, and have a great class. And welcome everybody to this discussion about equitable transportation. We've got Hector Huezo and Erica Iheme with us. And Hector is an old friend from Los Angeles. And Erica is a new friend who lives in Alabama. And just a reminder, as we go on with the evening, if suddenly a question occurs to you, please write it in the chat box. So you'll see a black band at the bottom of your screen, and you can press on the button that says chat, and then that'll give you a place where you can type your message. And you can even type it to particular people if you want, but your basic option is to type it to everyone. And I like that because then everybody gets to see what questions are coming up. Is Erica on the line yet? Oh yeah, there you are. Hey, Erica. Okay, great, great. Okay, so we are all here and let's get started. I'm going to introduce you to Erica and Hector here. Just let me get the document up here. There we go. First of all, Hector Huezo is now the Senior Workforce Equity Coordinator at Jobs to Move America. And he joined JMA as the California organizer in 2016. And it was in 2017 that Hector and I worked together on the LA County Electric Bus Coalition. I was sitting in with the Sierra Club. And in 7 months, we got to a victory. And now LA Metro is committed to electrifying the entire 2,500 bus system by 2030. And now Hector is the Senior Workforce Equity Coordinator at JMA. He's responsible for implementing and expanding on the California Coalition's workforce policies and community benefits wins to ensure more equitable and diverse hiring and training pathways into middle-class employment opportunities. Prior to JMA, Hector directed employment and training programs across Southern California for nearly a decade and has dedicated his career and personal activism to leveling the playing field for at-risk youth and communities of color to achieve a high quality of life, regardless of the systemic inequities that make that unachievable for far too many. Now, Erica Iheme, she's a little closer to us here. She's in Anniston, Alabama, and she's the Southern Director of Jobs to Move America. She's an educator, organizer, and strategic researcher. Erica earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in urban planning from Alabama A&M, a historically Black university based in Normal, Alabama. She spent the past 17 years building unions as an organizer all over America in several industries, including hospitals, public sector, Head Starts, higher education, and home care. During her time in academia, Erica focused her energy on university administration and research. Outside of organizing and research, Erica is a wife, mother, artist, and community builder. About 4 years ago, Erica decided to return to the South to further her career and be part of a spirit of organizing closer to her hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. Erica has an extensive history of organizing, training, and development in both union and community building environments. So here they are. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks for speaking up there. Yeah, say a little something, Erica, so you appear and we can see your.
Hello, everyone. Thank
Hey,
you,
good.
Kip, for the introduction, and we're
Sure.
so happy to share this space with you.
Good. Well, let's just jump right into it. Would you talk briefly, Hector, about our work in LA and the commitment to electric buses and how we got there? And then we'll jump right into a description of Jobs to Move America and how you've got a great tool for building racial equity as we move into clean energy.
Yeah, I can talk briefly about that. As Kent explained, a couple of years ago, environmental, labor, and community groups came together in Los Angeles with a vision for transitioning the entire, it's over almost 2,500 bus fleet at LA Metro to zero emissions electric buses. This was at a time when electric vehicle technology was quickly growing. It's becoming very competitive. And Metro had a history of adopting new technology. It was one of the first agencies to go from diesel to gas. So it had this precedent to go to the latest, cleanest technology. And we formed a coalition around these pillars that we should have the cleanest available buses, that they should be deployed in communities that have been historically impacted by environmental racism and injustice. They should be built by union workers, and that it should be powered. They should be powered by renewable energy, clean energy, and union jobs. So that was a big fight that Kent and myself, including folks from Sierra Club, Earth Justice, South Bay 350, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and others were a part of. And during that, we got a major commitment from LA Metro to transition its whole fleet by 2030, which is great. There are some wins that came as a result of that. But to that, we do have sort of like a presentation on all of JMA and then a lot of the work in the South as well. That when we get to it, we can I can share or pull it up.
Beautiful, thanks, Hector. Yeah, I'm glad you got that description there because that was certainly a high point of my work in LA. And Erica, I wonder if you would talk to us about Jobs to Move America and just get started. We want to know what you guys are doing. And oh, just by the way, one thing before I let you go, the community benefits agreements were in the news today here in Knoxville, because there's a ballpark that they're trying to build and a sports authority they're creating. And my county commissioner, Courtney Durrett, got up in front of the billionaire that's trying to build the park and asked him about community benefits agreements. And a bunch of allied organizations, including Jobs with Justice and Appalachian Voices and Strategic Organizing for Community Empowerment, or SOCM. These are all allies here in Knoxville. And so they'll be working on that. And hopefully some of that are on the call with us here tonight. Anyway, just a little introduction there. Community Benefits Agreement and Jobs to Move America. Let's hear about it, Erica.
Well, I'm excited to hear that Knoxville is exploring our theory to win around community benefits agreements. So what we're going to do now is we're going to share our screen so we could talk you through a little bit about the work we're doing. We tend to try to make sure that these presentations are really showing the points, but some of the slides I will say got a few more verbiage than we're accustomed to because we want to make sure that you're understanding what we're trying to do and it's in text as well as the context that we provide. So with that being said, I would like to introduce Hector to just start us off and talk us through where we are.
Sure. So a little bit about Jobs to Move America. We have offices across the US in regions where most buses and trains get purchased, as well as in the South in Birmingham, where Erica is, where a lot of manufacturing actually takes place. And it's really important to understand just how much purchasing public agencies do each year. That $2 trillion number that's on the screen is exactly right. And that's not just $2 trillion that comes out of Jeff Bezos' pocket or some rich person's pocket. Those are public dollars. There are tax dollars. And it's going to some it's going to private global companies, some of them who build buses and trains all over the world, to this tune of $2 trillion every year. And so we believe, and our organization believes, that our money should be creating good jobs. It should be strengthening communities and be creating opportunities for working families. And we coalesce around these sort of two ways that we achieve that vision. One is through public agencies and showing them what tools they can use to make sure that their purchasing power encourages quality jobs, that they're creating training programs, and that they're creating access to those programs for disadvantaged workers. The other piece of work that we're involved in, that Eric is going to share a little bit more about, especially in the South, is working with companies to make these commitments real. If transit agencies are asking for jobs plans and disclosures and training programs as part of how they evaluate who they're going to award contracts to, then we want to make sure that companies aren't just making those commitments to win the contract. We want to make sure that those commitments are real. And we have a tool for getting companies to commit to this called community benefits agreements. And so I'll just talk a little bit about community benefits agreements for folks who aren't completely familiar. It's great to hear that they were in the news recently in Nashville. I think that's what you said, Ken. But these are legally enforceable agreements. They're not just a handshake and a pat on the back. They spell out a lot of specific commitments that a company can make, often more so than what public agencies are even allowed to ask for in exchange for contracts. And they can be used, if a company says in order to win a contract that they're going to pay $15 an hour, and then they win the contract and they start paying $8 an hour, community benefits agreements can be used to say, hey, you said that you were going to pay this much when you competed for this. Now that you won it, we want to hold you to it. And that can be enforced through a community benefits agreement. But they also level the playing field for workers to be heard. Community benefits agreements, they allow for concerns about the job from workers themselves or from community members who are trying to access these jobs. They allow for those concerns to rise to the top for solution making. And they can be used to create training programs and incorporate the voice of local community leaders and local workers. And so, in kind of wrapping up a little bit about how JMA does its work, it's important to just kind of mention that these kinds of discussions and these commitments from companies, they don't generally happen over a cup of coffee. It takes a campaign. It takes a coalition of folks to come together to make this happen. And we do and participate in with our coalition partners a lot of the research to identify what the impactful points are that we can affect some of these decisions. We work to build and center community groups and worker groups and workers themselves into our work. That's how we build strong coalitions. We use a communication strategy as part of what we do to spread that message and help build momentum. And we also enlist the help of public agencies to provide that enforcement, to help create that accountability, which is also really important. And so maybe before I kick it over back to Erica to talk a little bit about our work in the South, I want to just highlight some of the recent wins we've had over the last couple of years. Well, we've gotten agencies to adopt one of our signature policies that we call the U.S. Employment Plan, which creates those conditions for spelling out what kinds of jobs a company is going to create. Or are they going to pay well? Are they investing in training programs? And then we also focus on a lot of transparency in job creation. It's not always contracts. It's not always through contracts that companies benefit. Sometimes they get tax incentives. Sometimes they get kickbacks or easements. And so we want to make sure that those are connected to good jobs, and that as we're transitioning to cleaner technology and electrifying our grid and electrifying our public transit, that also comes with good jobs, and that workers aren't left behind in the process. So we see community benefits agreements as tools for stronger workplaces. And if we have stronger workplaces, we think we can have stronger communities. So I think with that, maybe I'll pass it over to Erica to talk a little bit about the South specifically, if that's all right. And there you go.
Thank you, Hector. So the conditions in the South, I think before we even talk about the actual work that's happening here in Alabama, I think it's important to start off by just, reminding the group of where we are when it comes to the conditions of the South. So in the past 20 years, you've seen a shift of the Rust Belt from, the great states of Ohio, Pittsburgh, Michigan, all those factories that were like once thriving, booming communities have shut down and left a shell of a community, and they've shifted to the South. So we've seen all of these new manufacturing companies popping up, not only in Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia. Alabama has some of the most manufacturing corporations set up here than any other part of America, and is leading, in density in ways that we've never seen before. There's a high quality, the workforce that we're dealing with is really one where, unemployment on a national level is low. But when you really think about it, even though unemployment is low, so even like during COVID back in November, last time the numbers were pulled, Alabama was at 4.4% compared to 6.7% of the national average. You can go back to slide, Hector. But that's not the problem. It's great that unemployment is low, but the issue is that Alabama ranks in the top 5 when it comes to poverty. So we are seeing we're seeing jobs in Alabama, but are they good jobs? If the unemployment is so low, we should see a lower poverty rate. So there's no intersection. So we need to explore why is that. And also, traditionally, you know, Alabama was a plant town. It was a union town. These steel mills, coal mines, railroads. Like Alabama had some of the top union density. Alabama still have a pretty decent union density compared to other states where we're at about 8.7%, which is surprising for the South. It's one of the leading states that has union density in the South, but it's super anti-worker. We don't have any state worker protections. Most of our worker protections are federal. And it's really an anti-worker culture when it comes to how workplaces deal with their employees. And then also with these new manufacturing surging up in the South, like we have to, ask ourselves, Alabama is one of the few states with great resources and access to clean water. So it's Georgia and Tennessee. But with these manufacturing companies setting up, what type of environmental impact are we seeing? We see in places where those, industrial plants were set up in the 40s and 50s after they closed, those cities are still real. And even my neighborhood of Birmingham, in Birmingham, Alabama, that I grew up in, those old steel plants that closed, we found out years later that they're now brownfield sites because, they're just poison. The environment is poison. So as we start building these new companies and new factories in these southern, fresh environmental spaces, like we have to consider what is the environmental impact. And then also there's a lack of infrastructure and resources when it comes to worker education about what their rights are in the workplace, but also community education about, what are the conversations that need to be had around environment, around good jobs. Like there's just a lack of infrastructure in that way. So that's what we're dealing with when we talk about, moving into the South and the work that needs to happen. So in JMA, Hector talked about our strategy to win, and it includes policy work. So, in order for us to even be successful and be able to really move a conversation forward, we have to think about what are the policies and laws that's holding us back from being able to make real change. And we are in a place in Alabama to where we have to step back beyond just like the issue of like worker issues. We have to be able to get the issue of transparency resolved. So when you're talking about these companies and corporations coming to set up shop in places like Alabama, we have to consider what did it take for them to come here? And we all know that when these companies are coming, that there's some type of exchange or an agreement where the government is providing some type of incentives or some type of tax breaks or some type of giveaway that they're giving to bring them to us to make us an attractive place. Like it's not happenstance that everyone is moving to these states. There's an exchange that's happening. But with the lack of transparency in our structure of our law, there's no way for us to understand what exactly are we giving away. So good jobs first is a really good reference point for us to be able to understand like the type of money that's being given to these corporations to come to our towns. And what we're asking for in Alabama legislature is to be able to see more transparency and accountability when it comes to tax incentives and corporate giveaways. We also are asking to see to be able to have better access to public records. So when you think about the transparency laws that exist here right now, Alabama have some of the weakest. And when I say they're weak, that means that, Freedom of Information Act, everyone knows about FOIA. But Freedom of Information Act requires, that the municipality government entity is responsive when a citizen is seeking information. And what happens in Alabama is that we don't have any type of limitations of timeline of turnaround when there has to be a response. We don't have any type of mechanism for if a government is unresponsive. What is the penalty? There's no penalties. And it's full of language like may. A county may provide that information if it's available. A city might like in a time that is reasonable. Like what is the time that's reasonable? So we need to really strengthen and tighten up our accountability and transparency as well as access law. But in line with some of the ideas that Hector presented, we're working locally to try to require manufacturers to pay a living wage, hire workers from underrepresented communities, because what we see in this is a hard fact, but when these corporations come and the plants open, the good jobs are not going to Black workers. They're not going to people who have records. It's not going to immigrants. It's not going to. So like we need to be able to make sure that underrepresented communities are being served when we set up these new corporations and make these agreements. Next slide, please. So the work that we're doing in Alabama is really rooted in a grassroots effort. So the whole goal of a community benefits agreement is the whole goal of a community benefits agreement is to have a conversation between an employer and the community. And the community is really a coalition that's built up of civil rights groups, religious groups, labor groups, environmental groups, and it's called Alabama Coalition for Community Benefits. So this would be the group that's going to be in negotiation with the corporation to be able to have a CBA agreement. And then we work collectively to win the CBA by, coming together to figure out what the strategy is, figuring out what's the best approach, identifying what are the issues of the community. The best way to inform a CBA is to have community involvement and community participation. So JMA, Jobs to Move America, we sit on the coalition of the Alabama Community Benefits. And the work that we do is really centered around creating those opportunities across the South. So the current efforts that we have on our plate is one of the New Flyer. So New Flyer is a Canadian-based electric bus manufacturer. Is one of the top three in America. It is the largest plant is based in Anniston, Alabama, which is where a lot of our works are centered. I'm actually in Birmingham, Alabama. Anniston is where our campaign is based. But the thing that really kicked off this work was 2 years ago, Alabama A&M released a partial report around the conditions of the Anniston work plant and what was it like to be a Southern worker based in Anniston in the New Flyer plant. And what the findings came out was that, there were clear issues of discrimination within the workplace. It was people felt unsafe within the plant. There were several reports of injury, like 12% of the participants had been injured at some point on the job. And then also, access to the higher paying jobs or the more skilled jobs, people weren't feeling like they were distributed equitably. And then also, New Flyer received incentives, like most corporations that come to Alabama. And sometimes these incentives aren't just, cash or money, but it could be tax incentives, where, you come and we'll lease you this land at a cheap price, or you don't have to pay taxes for several years. Well, when that happens, the city, who's offsetting that money? Who's offsetting those tax incentives? And it's the citizens. We're paying the difference. So we're paying for all of this stuff. If it's not through the corporate giveaways, it's through the tax incentives that people are like kind of, missing out on. And then I think the final thing that makes, New Flyer a really practical choice for the next CBA is that they're the only one of the top three bus manufacturers who do not have a community benefits agreement. So if we're talking about creating a new green economy, it's very important that when we're talking about this economy, that it includes good jobs for Southern workers. So we cannot continue to move forward in the way that we've been doing by creating substandard conditions for workers to function in on the basis of creating a new green economy. So we have a really good opportunity here to shift the narrative of what it's like to be a Southern worker. Next slide, please. So current engagement right now, up until this point, what our coalition has really been doing is making an effort to communicate with New Flyer and try to encourage them to come and have a conversation about, creating a community benefits agreement. And, I would like to say that it's been a very smooth process, but the truth is it's been quite challenging. The employer have not really been open to having conversations around creating a community benefits agreement with our coalition. They've, they haven't really engaged with us in a direct way around creating a community benefits agreement. So, we're working and strategizing to figure out ways to, have the conversation. But in the meantime, the employer have went and took the ideal of a CBA, a community benefits agreement, which is a binding agreement, and they hired a contractor out of New York to come down and create their version of a CBA, which is called a community benefits framework. But the work that the coalition has already been doing, you're now bringing someone from outside to come in and do the exact same work that the people of the community is trying to do. So, employers tend to do that. I see it a lot in union drives and boss fights where the employer would, if they see workers are having issues or complaints about a certain condition, they'll come in and bring someone in to fix the problem so it'll just go away. But, if we're really about, moving this community benefits program in Alabama, we have to really make sure that, New Flyer is at least entertaining the idea to come and have a conversation with this grassroots effort of leaders who've been doing the work and is very aware of the issues of Anniston and Alabama and understand the needs of the community. That's what makes a CBA valuable. It's a real agreement between the employer and the community, and that's what we're seeking. So, why this work matters? So, this work matters because when our tax dollars are going to companies to come, and exist in our spaces, like the community should be a part of that conversation. The community understands what are the obstacles of their environment, of their education, their pipeline to career access, the type of jobs they have. The community are the people who go to work every day, so they know what it's like to work in these places. And when we're seeing these corporations come and receive, public dollars, we should be able to have a conversation with where our dollars are going and how they're spent, but also be a part of the conversation of what does it look like when it comes to a space where the community is having a conversation with the manufacturer. And in the old economy, right? There wasn't that space. If you didn't have a union, there was no space to have a conversation with how an employer run things. But if we're talking about building this new green economy, why not take advantage of this moment to really rethink how do we engage with employers and manufacturers who are in these southern towns? Like, we have an opportunity to really redefine and reimagine what the southern worker narrative is, but also what's the worker experience in this new green economy. And that includes like good jobs. We cannot say that a job is good just because it pays $15 an hour. Soon, I mean, if the new administration have it their way, that's going to be the federal minimum wage. So is $15 really a good job? When you're thinking about a good job, you got to also consider, is this job safe? Is it competitive with other states? Alabama is one of the bottom when it comes to all things worker conditions, pay, housing, poverty, but we have low unemployment rates. So are we really having good jobs? And then what is the path to leadership? As a person of color, do I have equal access to the same leadership opportunities as my counterparts? And until we're able to truthfully answer that question and be able to honestly say that this is so, we're doing ourselves a disservice if we think about a new green economy and not consider what does it really means to have a good job, and then how do we position people to be able to have a good job. And that concludes my piece of this talk, so I wanted to pass it over to Hector to talk about, what are the next steps for JMA on a federal level.
Yeah, and we're getting to the end of our presentation here. We're looking forward to talking to you all and answering questions, but also hopefully, enlisting you into our work, especially the cutting edge work that Erica is leading in the South. But as an organization, we're also thinking, beyond sort of our regional campaigns. We finally have an administration that can, transform the lives of working people, and has, voiced some a willingness to make some of those changes, raising the minimum wage being one of them. Jobs to Move America has identified some priority issues that we're interested in sort of building a national kind of coalition around and getting support for. One, some folks may be familiar with ending the ban on local hire provisions. Right now, there are rules that preempt municipalities and states to use federal money to create local jobs or like regional specific jobs. We think that is a way to create strong communities, especially if they're getting investment or there's building and development happening in their area. That's going to be a big part of our work over the next several years. We want to transform and end worker misclassification, which a lot of folks are familiar with this, is creating a race to the bottom in terms of jobs and gig work and part-time work, where companies don't have to treat you like an employee and can skip out on paying their fair share of taxes or providing necessary benefits that other companies are providing. And the third is changing scoring mechanisms in federal contracts. I know we talked a little bit about a policy that we use called the U.S. Employment Plan, but if we can scale that up and get all of the public agencies and all the different types of procurement and purchasing that government agencies do, and shift their focus to good job creation, promoting community benefits, taking care of our environment, changing those mechanisms for how contractors are selected on a national level, I think is going to be a priority for us as well. And so I encourage folks to follow our work at our website. Of course, folks are always encouraged to reach out to Erica or myself directly. But that's it for our presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand this back over to Kendall. But I'll also unmute Kent so you can take us through to the next step.
Okay, great. Wow, thank you very much. And we have some questions in the queue here, and I'm just going to cop a little privilege and ask one myself. When we were working in LA, we worked with unions. I remember you mentioned the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 11. Yeah, but we also had SMART, the sheet metal workers, were supporting our initiative to electrify the buses. Now, what about in a non-union environment like we sometimes find in the South? Can community benefits agreements work for non-union workers? Looks like Erica wants to jump in on that one.
I was on timeout. I can't get off of mute. No, I mean, so Kent, that's a really good question. And we are actually hoping, the opposite way, right? We think that CBAs is a pathway to unionization for unorganized workers.
Right.
So, again, like I said before, Alabama does have unions, and they have very strong unions where they exist. But the issue is the access to the unions, to being able to organize. We see that with Amazon right now.
Right.
Those workers are getting a terrible boss fight, and they're getting ready to have an election any day. So it's like, we saw it with Nissan. So like, workers have the inclination to organize, but because of the limited protections, it's such a dangerous act. So what we're trying to do is use community benefits agreement to create a path to unionization by just asking employees to be neutral. If your employees decide they want to form a union, do not interfere. That we're not saying you got to give your workers a union, but workers in the South deserve a path to be able to, be their own advocates through having their own unions. And right now, that's an impossible feat. It's very difficult to do, and it's, for America to be America, it's quite shameful, actually.
Oh, okay, great. Well, thank you. Thanks for filling me in on that. We've got a couple of questions in the chat box here, and I want to, is it okay if we just let someone, Mark Lyon has the first question. Can we let Mark speak and ask his question directly? Is that all right?
Sure.
Great. So Mark Lyon, unmute Mark, and Mark, let's hear your question about rural Alabama workers recognizing the disadvantages. Is Mark still here with us?
Oh, I have to unmute.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. So I have been focused on this urban-rural divide when it comes to a lot of the social policies that we are discussing. So I'm wondering, what is the mindset? This is probably for Erica.
Mm-hmm.
What is the mindset of the rural Alabama worker, particularly those working in plants or companies, when it comes to their vision or how wide of scope are they able to look at this and receive new ideas, new emphasis on possibilities of better working conditions, better salaries, the possibility of negotiating stronger? Are they into this, or is it mainly just looking to have a job to put food on the table? Not that that's not a worthy
That's
goal
right.
to have, but
Oh,
it
that's
sounds
right.
like what you're talking about, Erica, would take them beyond that and show them there are other benefits, there are other basic rights that they could have beyond that. But I don't know, is that are rural workers in the South, particularly in Alabama, are they picking up on that?
Mark, that's an excellent question, and I think you kind of answered it yourself. You know, in the South, what I've seen, I mean, I've worked in, I've been organizing workers across the South for a very long time, and what I find is that, it is just about having food on the table, and it isn't until a rural worker have a conversation with somebody like me that they even realize that there's challenges in their work. The average person isn't used to talking about their job, let alone talk about the issues in a real way of their job. Like, the average person, like, oh, my job sucks, XYZ, but they don't really know how to identify, like, what about your job actually sucks, right? So, like, we have to, like, figure out a way to have conversations with not just urban workers, but the rural workers, because these conversations help people understand, like, what are their needs. Like, we can't go in as a coalition and assume the needs of the workers, just like unions can't go into a worker's house and assume the need of them. So we have to, like, create space. So that's what the CBA does. It invites an organization so we could create space to identify what the issues are, and then we use that identification of issues to figure out, how do we change these in partnership with the employer. So yes, up until the time we have conversations, I think it is about just having food on the table. But we need to push Alabama workers to think beyond that, and, like, figure out, like I said, reimagine what would it be if we had real good jobs, and be clear about what are the issues that we face in rural Alabama as well as urban Alabama, as well as across the South as a whole. So I love that question. And I think that's the way we need to be thinking about it, Mark, because we can't just assume that it's all looked at the same, but we also can't assume that people aren't smart enough to, have those hard conversations either.
Great, thanks, Erica. And that's a really important discussion, and we should all think about continuing that beyond this workshop. David Kays, are you still available? And can we unmute David so that he can ask his question?
I didn't really have a question, just an observation. I went to the New Flyers web page, and they announced there's some sort of a workers committee, which sounds like an EBA. See, maybe it's their compromise. Maybe they announced it today or yesterday, according to their website. It's just an observation, no question.
Oh, great, thanks. Well, actually, I see Erica laughing heartily over that, and so I think she might have something to say about it.
I said I wasn't going to get too deep into the New Flyer drama in this call, but I mean, it's the reality of the situation. So, like I said, we had a meeting with New Flyer about a year and a half ago where we talked about the findings of the report and how we wanted to have talk about a CBA. We thought that this was a good faith meeting where they would work with us to try to create a CBA. But instead, what happened was, a month later, you know, New Flyer and TDC made an announcement that they were going to develop a CBF, a community benefits framework. I mean, and the truth is, I think it's a knockoff version of a community benefits agreement because it doesn't have the community on the ground level moving it. So, the Workforce Development Committee, the workforce, the employee engagement committee, like, those are all things that a community benefits agreement and a coalition will take on. And what they're doing is they're just giving the public what they think is satisfactory. So we're not going to give you a community benefits agreement, which is a binding agreement, but instead we're going to hire a firm who's going to help us solve all of our problems internally. Well, the issue with that is that there's no external accountability mechanism. So again, we're at the whim of the employer. And what New Flyer has done is they really, and they're doing it recently because, you know, I did an op-ed about 2, 3 months ago where I talked about like, the firm they're using, TDC, has been an astroturf firm to just kind of like create an illusion that these things are happening. And maybe they are happening, but the community are the ones who's supposed to be a part of that conversation and driving that conversation. It shouldn't be someone from New York coming down telling us what are the needs of our community and helping us figure out our issues. Like we have the skills here. We have civil rights, we have religious, we have labor, we have environmental groups on the coalition who are actively thinking about this every day in Alabama. Why can't we have a conversation with New Flyer to be able to serve as that mechanism?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Erica. And by the way, I've put the link to the article that you're talking about, Erica, in the chat there, so that anybody on the call can read that.
And I imagine, I'm sorry to, I imagine that this recent flurry, like, we're seeing like a lot of, things happening just in the past day or two, because last week I had a conversation with the Anniston Star, which is the local paper there, where I talked about, our need to, really push New Flyer to form a real community benefits agreement. And I addressed some of the issues that we thought were problematic in this work. And I think, the things that you're seeing coming up on their website today is really a response to that article.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Well, I think that actually I welcome your bringing up the New Flyer drama, as you call it, because we're kind of part of it here in Knoxville. We're buying those buses, and some people from New Flyer came up and talked to our city council, and they had some complaints about they claimed that New Flyer had broken an agreement, or they weren't paying the wages that they'd committed to. And now New Flyer is, I think there's an agreement, or there's at least they're working on an agreement whereby Knoxville will buy the charging equipment to charge up those buses. That's another contract, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess New Flyer would come up and install the chargers. And so we here in Knoxville need to understand what's really going on. And so far, we're really in the dark about it. We've heard about it. There's been a little bit. It's been mentioned in City Council, but we really don't know quite what's happening.
I mean, when it comes down to it, Kent, it really is just, an employer who refused to engage the community directly and be able to have the real conversation that we're trying to have. And they're putting up obstacles to make that happen. And what we would say to anybody who's getting ready to contract a New Flyer is to just tell them straight up, like, look, we're not going to give you our resources unless you be like the other bus manufacturers, electric bus manufacturers, that have a community benefits agreement. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, like, what is it? Because the problem, the biggest problem with all of this is that New Flyer is demonstrating to all of these corporations that's moving to Alabama that it's okay to disrespect the community. It's okay to disrespect our coalition. It's okay to disrespect our workers when they refuse to engage with our coalition. So what happens when they do that is that they're setting a standard to where we're reinventing this old workforce that we're trying to move into as we're going into this new green economy. We're taking the old behaviors of the last manufacturing stratosphere. And that's, is that what we want to do? We want to make sure you're in Knoxville, y'all our neighbors. Like, you want to make sure that the jobs that's coming here are safe, that people have access to the good jobs, not just because of their skin tone. You want to see opportunities for people who made a mistake and been to prison and are out and trying to reform. You want to see them be able to have opportunities. We can't keep recycling these behaviors. And that's what I mean when I say we have to reimagine what the Southern worker experience is. And we have to start having expectations of corporations that come here and not just be happy they're coming with jobs, because these jobs they're getting, people are getting hurt. People are getting discriminated against. People are getting paid wages that are not livable. Do we want to continue that path?
Well, great. Thanks so much, Erica. That really that's really helpful, and I think that we're on the cusp of facing those issues in a big way here in Knoxville. And I know there are people on the call who also work with the Bull Run group, and that's a group of people who are dealing with coal ash disposal around the Bull Run power plant, which is slated to close in a couple of years now. And some of our friends and neighbors were people who were injured during the coal ash cleanup in Kingston 12 years ago. And they were sickened, and we've lost 50 of them so far. And that's just the kind of situation that a community benefits agreement would have helped. And
Exactly.
I remember back at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned about the community benefits agreement was basically the result of a grassroots process. And I think the community benefits framework that they came up with at New Flyer is more like an AstroTurf thing, where it's kind of built by a PR company rather than built by the people themselves. And I think that's exactly where the difference comes in. I'm looking at the chat here just to see what's going on, because it's bursting with activity.
Action packed, Kent.
What? I want to see about my friend Brady Watson is on. I want Brady to come on, because he's mentioning something that happened from New Flyer, and I wondered if we could unmute Brady and have you meet him. He's an important activist here in town. And Brady, ask your question.
Well, I don't know about the important part, but I appreciate it, Kent. And Eric, you already answered it. It was basically the press release that they put out about the employee input session that Mark mentioned, or that David mentioned. But I guess, while I've come off mute here, I am curious. I know there are folks on the call here that are also involved with the proposed baseball stadium to be built in Knoxville, and it's basically a super wealthy individual that's wanting the city to fund part of it, and of course he's promising private investment in return. But I think they just had a meeting yesterday actually, and he kind of balked at a formal community benefits agreement, touting kind of all the good stuff he already he already does in the community. So I was wondering if you had any kind of advice to folks that are trying to organize around that and make sure that we get a good community benefits agreement out of that.
Yeah. My question in return to him would be like, why not? If you're doing all these great things naturally, why not just create a community benefits agreement so we can make sure that this thing is solid? Let's get married. Because that's pretty much what it is. It's like, when you're engaging a builder, or like these wealthy people who are bringing money to the area, and we're giving, we're supplementing the work essentially with our taxpayers' dollars. Like, why not? Okay, you're going to come. So let's talk about the terms of what that means that you're coming. Because oftentimes in those conversations, they're made through the government officials, and we have no understanding of what those agreements are. So, like, why not be able to have a conversation where we, add an agreement? This is showing good faith on your behalf as a future employer, that you're committed to our community. Brady, I see you don't want to marry him, but we want a CBA, right? Look at Nashville. Look at how, so many underrepresented communities were able to benefit as far as jobs go, and the housing commitments that came out of that. Like, there's a benefit to having a CBA. And I think that there's a taboo around, asking the hard questions, because we don't want to run people away. But the truth is, like, they need Knoxville as much as Knoxville need them.
Totally.
So thank you for your question. I think that was a good one. I think we should, in all of the spaces that we see these incentives being given away, that you should be, challenging them. We actually are doing a report around Alabama tax incentives and corporate giveaways. It'll be released next month. Once I get that, I'll send it over to Kent so he can share it with the listserv. But it's talking about like the billions of dollars that we've given away. We gave Miles the $900 million to create a factory here in Alabama. And people are always saying like, you know, it's the South. The South is poor. The South is not poor. The South is not poor. If we have $1 billion to bring Mercedes to, you know, to Alabama, $1 billion
Right.
to bring Mazda, like we're not poor, but our workers are poor.
Yeah. No, that's really true. In fact, Tennessee has gotten tons of money, has given tons of money to corporations to build electric cars here.
Mhm.
And yet there's no policies in place in Tennessee to help Tennesseans actually enjoy the cars that we're building. We're basically building cars for everybody else.
Yeah.
And we're giving tax money. General Motors is going to build a Cadillac Lyriq, an electric SUV in Spring Hill, and the Volkswagen ID3 will be built in Chattanooga. And we're already building Nissan Leafs here over in Smyrna. And I think there's in Spring Hill, they're also building another, I think it's going to be an Acura, but it's going to be built by General Motors. And that's a new kind of electric sports car that's coming along. So the state has given a bunch of money for that. And the states that really adopt electric cars give incentives to individual residents. And we worked hard in LA to make sure those incentives were available to low income people as well. Nothing like that happens in Tennessee. So you're right, it's not a commitment. It's what they do is they kind of do a general PR thing, but the money just moves around from government to business to government to business, and the people don't really have a say. And what the thing I love so much about JMA, Jobs to Move America, is that you guys win stuff, and we need to win stuff here in Tennessee. So I'm really glad that you joined us tonight and helped us with this stuff. And yeah, anything that you send me, I will send along through Daniel Jaranko and the new Green Economy Conference that we're all a part of. But I really appreciate the conversation, Erica, and I guess Hector had to go on
He
to
got kicked
something else.
off.
But
No, he
he
got
got
kicked
kicked
off.
off?
He's having issues with his Wi-Fi. He sent the note saying that he's gonna try to get back on. So I think he's
Oh,
off.
okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I don't want to break us up if anybody else has a question, but I don't see send contact information for coal ash from Robert Binford. Robert, I will do that. Yes, I got your email, and so I will send you information about coal ash.
Thank
So
you
if
guys for your
anybody else,
time.
sure, yeah, thank you so much for yours. Are there any other questions or any comments anybody wants to share? You can raise your hand or put something in the chat, and we can take it on. But if not, then I'll let you all go. And anyway, thank you again so much, Erica. Great
It's been a
talking to you.
pleasure. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
yeah.
Thank you guys.
Okay. Good night, all. Bye-bye.